Most people think a killer looks like a monster. They imagine a dark figure in a hoodie or a chaotic individual with madness in their eyes. But as a licensed counselor, I've learned that the most dangerous individuals often look like the person in the mirror. They look like a grieving mother or a poised, elegant ballerina. In 1983, Diane Downs pulled into an emergency room in Oregon with her 3 children shot, claiming a bushy-haired stranger targeted them on a dark road. In 2020, Ashley Benefield stood over the body of her husband, claiming she was a victim of domestic abuse who finally had to fight back. On the surface, these cases look entirely different. One a random roadside shooting, the other a home defense claim. But beneath the surface, the psychological DNA is identical. Both women utilized a sophisticated performance of victimhood to mask a calculated act of violence. Today, I'm opening the clinical file of the deceptive victim mask. I'm going to show you the specific psychological red flags that connect these 2 cases, indicators that the untrained eye misses, but the clinical eye can't ignore. This is the anatomy of a mask. I'm John Cordray, and I've been a licensed professional counselor since 2007. Every day in my practice, I sit across from people who have survived genuine soul-crushing trauma. I know what true fear looks like. I know the way the voice cracks and the way the body holds onto the memory of a threat. But I also see the patterns of those who weaponize the same trauma narrative for power and control. When I analyzed the Ted Bundy case, I looked at how the charming antisocial profile can fool a nation. But the female-led victim mask is often far more complex and harder for the legal system to untangle because it plays on our deepest societal instincts, the desire to protect a woman and a mother. And we're biologically wired to believe a crying mother. I'm going to compare the Diane Downs blueprint with the modern Ashley Benefield Black Swan case. I'm going to look at 3 specific clinical indicators: affective incongruence, narrative rigidity, and systemic weaponization. By the end of this video, you won't just see the 2 defendants. You'll see the psychological machinery of deceptive mask and how it hasn't changed in over 40 years. Let's go back to May 19, 1983, Springfield, Oregon. Diane Downs drives her blood-soaked car to the hospital. 1 child is already dead. 2 are critically injured. Her story is sensational. She says a bushy-haired stranger tried to carjack her on a desolate road. But from a clinical perspective, the red flag wasn't her story. It was her affect incongruence. This is a term we use in therapy when a person's outward emotional expression doesn't match the internal gravity of the situation. While her children were fighting for their lives, Diane was flirting with reporters. She was calm. She was theatrical. And in one famous clip, she reenacts the shooting for cameras with a smile, showing more excitement for the attention than grief for her children.
Okay, I go like that. I got in the car, jumped in, put the keys in. I just hit my cast.
In my practice, when I see someone describing a tragedy with the same emotional weight as a grocery list, it tells me that there is a profound disconnection or a performance occurring. Diane wasn't grieving. She was starring in her own movie. The motive? A man she was obsessed with didn't want children. Clinically, this points toward a high narcissistic and histrionic profile. In this profile, other human beings, even your own children, are seen as objects or obstacles to be removed rather than people to be loved. They are props in a play. We have to look at the theatrics of her behavior. Diane Downs loved the lens. She would fix her hair before talking about her daughter's death. This is an indicator of external validation seekers. The need for public sympathy was greater than her internal reality. She needed to be the heroic survivor. This is the historical blueprint for what we are seeing today. One of the most chilling aspects of the Downs case was how she tried to use the medical and legal system to validate her lie. She didn't just tell the police. She told the doctors, the nurses, and anyone else who would listen. She was planting seeds. In the clinical world, we call this systemic weaponization. It's the use of an authority figure, be it a doctor or a police officer or a judge, to document a false reality. Diane didn't just want to be believed. She wanted to be recorded as the victim. She assumed that if she could get a professional to write down her story, the story became a fact. As a counselor, I often see this in high-conflict custody cases. One parent will bring a child to therapy, not because they want the child to heal, but because they want me as the therapist to write a report that proves the other parent is bad. They aren't looking for a clinical outcome. They're looking for a legal weapon. Diane Downs was the master of this. She thought that she could out-talk the evidence. But as we move into the second half of this analysis, you're going to see how Ashley Benefield took this exact historical blueprint and updated it for the 21st century. She didn't use a bushy-haired stranger. She used something much more powerful in today's world, the victim of abuse narrative. Now let's fast forward to the present day, the Black Swan case, Ashley Benefield. On the surface, she was the polar opposite of Diane Downs. Where Diane was loud, overtly flirtatious, and wore her narcissism on her sleeve, Ashley is poised, soft-spoken, and elegant. She was a professional ballerina, and she brought that discipline, that extreme sense of control over the body into the courtroom. But clinically, when we peel back the now, we see the same systemic weaponization we just discussed about with Diane. Long before the shooting of her husband, Doug Benefield, Ashley was building a paper trail. She didn't just claim abuse once. She made allegation after allegation: child abuse, poisoning, domestic violence. Yet almost all of those were investigated and closed without charges. In my practice, I see this as preemptive victim posturing. It's the use of the legal and medical systems to create a documented reality that justifies a future action. If you tell enough people you're afraid, even if there's no objective threat, eventually you have a crowd of witnesses who can testify. They aren't testifying to the fact of the abuse. They are testifying to the performance of your fear. During her trial, the same affect incongruence that we saw in Diane Downs emerged, but it was more modernized for the 21st century audience. Ashley's performance of fear was so perfectly calm and poised that the prosecution argued it was a rehearsed script. When I work with genuine trauma survivors, their nervous systems are often dysregulated. Their breathing changes, their bodies tense. They might lose their place or disassociate in a way that looks messy. Ashley, however, remained regulated. The forensic evidence showed Doug was likely turning away when he was shot, meaning the threat Ashley claimed to be afraid of didn't match the physical reality of the ballistics. Like Diane, Ashley had a clear motive: a narcissistic injury. Her dance company was failing, her marriage was over, and her identity as a successful ballerina entrepreneur was crumbling. She wasn't fighting for her life, she was fighting for her narrative. I want to talk about narrative rigidity here. In my many years as a LPC, this is one of the biggest red flags I look for in the counseling room. A genuine memory is elastic. When you tell a story about something that actually happened to you, the details might come out in a different order each time. You might remember the smell of the room one day and the sound of the door the next. Your emotions will leak through in unexpected places. But in both the Diane Downs and the Ashley Benefield cases, we see rigid narratives. They have a script, and they stick to it with terrifying precision. When Diane was questioned, she didn't sound like a grieving mother. She sounded like a spokesperson for her own innocence. When Ashley took the stand, she didn't sound like a terrified survivor. She sounded like she was delivering a monologue. This leads us to histrionic personality traits. This isn't just about being a drama queen. Clinically, it's a pervasive pattern of excessive emotionality, and attention-seeking. People with these traits often over-identify with a role where the role becomes more real than the truth. Diane over-identified with a heroic survivor. Ashley over-identified with a fragile victim. Think about the comments many of you left in my analysis of the Benefield testimony in a video I did a while back. Many of you were moved by her. You said that she looked so sincere. That's the power of the mask. These individuals are so disconnected from the truth that they believe their own performance in the moment. In clinical terms, we call this pseudologia fantastica, where the lie is so integrated into the ego that the person doesn't feel the psychological stress of lying. That's what makes them so convincing to a jury and so dangerous to the people in their lives. They aren't just lying to you. They've already lied to themselves and they believe it. But why do these masks eventually turn to violence? It usually comes down to what we call a narcissistic injury. This is a psychological term for a blow to a person's ego or public-facing image that's so severe it feels like a literal death. For Diane Downs, the injury was rejection. The man she obsessed with didn't want her because she had children. To Diane, those children weren't human beings. They were obstacles to her perfect life. By removing them, she thought she could fix her image and get what she wanted. For Ashley Benefield, the injury was a collapse of the Black Swan dream. The American National Ballet, the company she and Doug started, was failing. The marriage was toxic and ending. Her identity as the star and the visionary was dying. When a person with these high conflict traits loses their status, they often turn to the ultimate victim role as a way to reclaim power. If they can't be the success, they will be the survivor. When we lay these cases side by side, 3 psychological indicators stand out that every viewer should know. The first one is maternal gatekeeping as control. Both women use their children as the prize. For Diane, it was removing them. For Ashley, it was alleged protection to keep her daughter to herself in a custody battle. The second one is impressionistic speech. Both spoke in grand emotional themes. He was a monster. I was so scared, but lacked the messy sensory details of genuine trauma. The third one is a systemic weaponization. Both women spent months or even years trying to get authority figures to document their victimhood before the final act of violence occurred. Diane Downs is serving life in prison. Ashley Benefield was recently sentenced to 20 years for manslaughter. The legal system eventually saw through the mask, but only after lives were lost, children were traumatized, and families were shattered. As a counselor, my goal isn't just to talk about the what, but to help you understand the why. When we understand these clinical indicators, we aren't just watching true crime. We're learning how to spot the red flags in our own lives. It isn't about being paranoid. It's about being psychologically literate. It's about knowing the difference between a person in pain and a person in a performance. Now I want to hear from you. What did you think about this case? After seeing the parallels between Diane Downs in the 80s and Ashley Benefield today, do you think the legal system is getting better at spotting these theatrical masks? Or are we still easily swayed by the perfect victim narrative? Drop your thoughts below in the comments. The victim mask is one of the hardest patterns to identify, especially when it's built over a lifetime. If you want to understand where the split between reality and performance actually begins, you need to look at the foundation of the personality. You should watch my deep dive into Ted Bundy's childhood, The Birth of a Serial Killer. It shows the exact moment the mask starts to form in a child's mind as a survival mechanism. I'll see you in the next clinical file. Stay curious, stay safe, and keep looking a little deeper. Good day and good night.